Hello, everyone, and welcome to our EarthFest Proclamation and presentation on Rochester's Sustainability and Resiliency Community Work Plan as a part of our EarthFest celebration this year. We're excited to have you with us here virtually. Our EarthFest steering committee and partners have put together a full lineup of events on all topics Earth-related, all leading up to our EarthFest Expo that's back again in person this year on April 30th, Saturday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. We also invite you to visit our new website and follow us on Facebook to keep up to date on our upcoming events. Today's event has been made possible by our sponsors. They include AARP, Christ United Methodist Church, Conservation Minnesota, Daguna Consulting, Mayo Foundation for Medical Education and Research, Nurture and Nature Therapy Sessions, People's Food Co-op, Sierra Club, Solar Connection, and the City of Rochester. If you have any technical issues as we move throughout today's event, I will be keeping an eye on the chat and can assist as able. Also, please keep your microphones off unless invited to ask questions, and feel free to submit questions or comments in the chat as we will monitor it throughout tonight's presentation. With that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll hand it over to Mayor Norton to start us off with our EarthFest 2022 proclamation.
Thank you, Lauren. Good to see some people here. I am really excited that EarthFest is kicking off and that it will be culminating. Really, it's going to be all month long and culminating at the end of the month, and I look forward to that event as well. So I do have a proclamation to start off, and I'll make a few comments after that and then hand it back to Lauren. So the proclamation states, whereas Earth Day is Friday, April 22nd, 2022, and whereas this past year, Minnesota experienced numerous climate change related impacts, including a record June heat wave, dangerous air quality from drought fueled forest fires, where even healthy people were encouraged to remain inside, and water restrictions from that same drought, making it clear that the climate crisis is not only a future issue, it is affecting us here and now. And whereas in August 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, the United Nations body responsible for assessing the science related to climate change, released a report that stated, and I quote, "It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere and the land, and that human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. And with every additional increment of global warming, changes in extremes continue to become larger," unquote. And whereas recent scientific research indicates that to achieve the goal of limiting temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius, carbon emissions must be halved by 2030 and reach net zero global emissions by 2050. And whereas the mission of EarthFest is to raise awareness, to provide education and resources, and to create inspiration and opportunities to develop a more environmentally sustainable and climate change resilient community. And whereas the 7th annual EarthFest is set to kick off with the return of an in-person expo event celebrating the earth and sustainability. And whereas this year's programming will again include engaging virtual sessions on urban agriculture, waste and recycling, the new Sustainability and Resiliency Community Work Plan, and other events include an EarthFest Trivia Night, a biking pub crawl, green business recognition, and a tree planting hosted by myself, Mayor Norton. Festivities will wrap up with the 2022 EarthFest Expo on April 30th at the Farmers Market, with partners representing community organizations, volunteer groups, businesses, nonprofits, and more. And whereas EarthFest is a wonderful opportunity each year for Rochester and the surrounding area to celebrate the earth, learn about sustainability, and join with our neighbors in a family-friendly event. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Kim Norton, Mayor of the City of Rochester, Minnesota, do hereby proclaim EarthFest 2022 and encourage all citizens to participate in any or all of the events to make Rochester a better place to live. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and cause the corporate seal of the City of Rochester to be affixed the 7th day of April, 2022. So I do have the proclamation. It's hard to see here online, but I will give that to Lauren to be utilized. And I also want to say, we have a wonderful community and we're making it better. I started my term as mayor having sustainability as one of my priorities. We had a press conference and announced kind of a year-long focus on sustainable and resilient living. And unfortunately, that first year, the pandemic intervened. We didn't give up. We have continued to work. And one of the ways that we did that was by utilizing you, the community, in creating our future as it relates to sustainability with the Sustainability and Resiliency Task Force. It is through your efforts in this community, the smart, wonderful, caring people of Rochester, that all these, that the document was designed and all these ideas and goals have been created. And so I am really excited for the years ahead, the work that we have to do, not just as a city, but also as a community. And I look forward to all of you helping us create the kind of community that we want, where environmental stewardship, fiscal responsibility, and social equity are all components of that sustainability and resiliency plan. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to the rest of the month of wonderful activities and would invite you to join us at the tree planting. I'm really excited to be able to do my part here in the mayor's office. We're going to do several tree plantings this year to try to help address greenhouse gas emissions and fight those as we can, of course, with planting trees. So thanks so much. And I'm going to hand it over to Lauren, who will do her presentation. And thanks, Lauren, and good luck this month.
Thank you, Mayor Norton, for kicking us off here. I will share my screen and we'll get started with an overview on Rochester's Sustainability and Resiliency Community Work Plan. So this plan is to build off of the Energy Action Plan that was adopted back in 2017. And when that plan was adopted, it focused on 3 categories, which were power generation, buildings, and transportation. It outlined goals and priority actions for the city and each of those areas, and it adopted the specific goals of 1.5% annual retail energy savings, which we meet every year thanks to our utility partners, a 25% renewable energy by 2025, which Rochester will have 100% renewable energy by 2030, again, thanks to our utility partners and their 100% renewable resource plan. And then finally, it outlined greenhouse gas emissions reductions, 15% by 2015, 30% by 2025, and 80% by 2050. As we started working towards the implementation of this plan and achieving the goals, we realized that the plan was very technically focused and lacked really equity in its implementation. As the city moves forward in building a culture of sustainability, we really want to highlight that to be truly sustainable, it means we're not only thinking about our environment, but our economy and social equity most importantly. And so how can the government kind of lift this up and help enable this type of sustainability to happen in our community? What sort of rules and procedures can we set up and resources can we provide? So with that, wanting to build equity into its implementation, we decided to pursue a sustainability plan for the community. This is to guide leadership to adopt and modify policies and services that would help us meet that 3-tiered approach, to broaden the city's definition of sustainability and resiliency and what it means to us and our community, and really to create goals and metrics that can complement and highlight the existing ones we had, particularly putting a focus on environmental justice. The vision that our community task force came up with was an equitable, inclusive community where people, economy, and environment are supported and thrive together. Our task force was made up of over 45 members from the community who represented voices that we don't often typically hear from in our government or decision-making processes. The task force itself was over 20% people of color, and at the time that was higher than the average for the community of Rochester. It included people from major organizations, community groups, youth, elderly, those who experience disabilities, just really taking a wide array of voices to include that lived experience in this planning process. To come up with the strategies and tactics that you'll see were decided upon in the plan, we really embarked on a robust community engagement process. So task force members were first assigned to look at the existing plans and documents that our city, community organizations, businesses already had in place to identify areas where there were gaps or potential opportunities. We then took it a step further using the task force and their relationships throughout the community to come up with a really robust community engagement process. We did a typical survey that we offered in 4 languages, but we also focused on what we called community listening sessions, where we could particularly prioritize the underserved voices of our community. So we hosted over 36 one-on-one hour-long listening sessions with individuals or groups in the community, and just ask them open-ended questions about what they envision for the future of Rochester, what would really allow them to thrive here, and what would help them to better connect to their communities. We had quite a few different needs that were identified throughout that process, and this just highlights a few of the ones that we saw repeatedly across those conversations. So affordable housing and living wages came up, equity across the board in terms of addressing disparities, but also the diversity in our businesses, in our local government, in our boards and commissions. Accessibility of transportation in terms of routes, times, and cost. Sustainable infrastructure and increased green space, and with that, equitable increased green space throughout the community. Our task force then took these needs that were identified by community members, these gaps that they identified within existing plans, and they put those together to create what is now the strategies and tactics of the plan. So for example, with community experience, if we heard that heat waves or energy bills was a need in the community, recommendations that reflected that could include something like cooling stations when our community experiences extreme heat events. Once we had a draft of those strategies and recommendations, that was all brought back to those community groups and individuals that we met with to make sure that, one, they had a chance to review the draft plan before it was finalized and share any thoughts or input, but 2, for us to share with them how their input was used, and if it wasn't, why or why not. The end result was a community approved plan that has 6 focus areas you can see across the top here. There are 34 strategies across those focus areas with 107 tactics between those strategies. This plan is really meant to be a living document, understanding that as technology changes, as our community continues to grow and develop, the tactics that help us meet these strategies might change as well. Each of those tactics was individually mapped against the focus areas of our comprehensive plan to really tie it into our local efforts, as well as the UN Sustainable Development Goals to give a global picture on this and how we're fitting into that broader concept of sustainability and climate action across the world. Again, all of that was mapped down to our city council's priorities to show again how this plan really feeds up into the strategies, the actions, the priorities that we as a community have set. And again, it's really meant to be a community plan. So as a city, we understand that while there are things that we can support and influence, not everything is best for us to lead. So really partnering and understanding that the community organizations who help develop this plan also play a big role in its implementation. There's a pretty even split between the tactics that are outlined in the plan in terms of what the city can really lead and provide direction on, and what the community is already doing, and maybe just needs a little bit of support or help. Again, with the breakdown of the tactics, they were mapped out in terms of how long we envision them taking. So there's a pretty, again, decent split between some things that are already in progress, but maybe just need a little additional assistance, versus tactics that can be envisioned in the short term, so 1 to 3 years, midterm being 5 to 10 years, and long-term being 10 plus years. We'll dive into a bit of the examples. We'll share some examples of our recommendations that are in the final plan here. So I just pulled out one from each of our 6 focus areas to really show how we broke everything down. Each tactic was shared in the plan. If you see it, there will be a full description of how it helps to make our community more sustainable, as well as the social equity components for that tactic and how it builds equity in our community. So the first example strategy here is from our climate change resilience category, and it's to determine a percent of carbon emissions reduction goals for commercial buildings to reach by a specified date. This is kind of building upon the existing goals that Rochester has, but creating a baseline so that we know and we have something to compare to as we continue to work towards our broader goals, just breaking them out into smaller buckets of commercial and residential. Tactics that feed into this strategy to help us achieve it would be requiring energy benchmarking for large commercial properties. We currently have a voluntary benchmarking program, but this would move to create incentives to benchmarking participants and a broader array of participants kind of managing their energy use in their buildings on a more day-to-day basis. This is something we've started pursuing and looking into, and is very much something the city would lead since it's more of a policy initiative. Another tactic is to support the state adoption of the Sustainable Building Energy Code for new construction of a certain size, and to work with the state to establish a standard to create a pathway to net zero buildings. This is something the city supports. We participate in a variety of cohorts that are working towards these measures and advocate at the state level when possible. The final tactic is to evaluate the possibility of connecting existing district energy systems for new developments, particularly those that are with a documented pathway to carbon neutrality that aligns with the city's greenhouse gas reduction goal. Again, the city is pursuing a district energy system. The goal is to be an example in setting a system like this, but we also have identified areas around the system that will be established where it could be expanded for other private buildings to connect to. The more buildings that connect into a district energy system, the more efficient it works for everyone involved, and therefore the better operational processes and money savings for everyone, as well as greenhouse gas emissions reductions. In our City for Health category, the strategy I pulled out was our resilience hubs to create a network of resource hubs that increases residents' access and education to respond to community needs. The first tactic is to create an emergency shelter hub where services and resources are provided. This could be in existing building spaces, online, as well as new building spaces that may be developed based on the needs in the community and the geographical distribution of where current spaces like this could be used. This is something the city would support, depending on if it's in existing spaces that it could be built into, or if it's new spaces that we'd be looking at. And we did actually just receive a grant from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency that would help us do another community co-design process to bring community members in to help us to design what a resilience hub plan would look like for the Rochester community. Another tactic is to create a community health hub. This would focus on services specifically related to health, again, through pop-up or existing locations. One thing we really heard from a lot of people in our engagement sessions was prioritizing mental health. So really making sure that that's a focus and that those are included in the services provided. Again, we have a great healthcare system here in Rochester, so this is something the city can help influence in terms of providing support, possible resources, or just connections and partnerships. The last one is a hub that would provide access to social services. Again, this stems out of feedback that we received from the community, really stemming that there is a lot of great organizations here, a lot of services that are available to people, but not really a clear path of where to go to access those services and how to access them and when. So providing more of a one-stop shop for our community members to receive those services they might need. The next focus area in the plan is vibrant neighborhoods. The strategy I pulled out here was to improve the equity and accessibility of housing in Rochester. In almost every single community engagement listening session that we hosted, affordable housing came up as an identified community need. So tactics that can help us achieve this are identifying opportunities to support and enhance existing or new naturally affordable housing. So either conversion or repurposing of existing structures, desegregating housing and reducing the disparities in home ownership caused by racist policies put in place by local, state, and federal governments. Our task force was fortunate to have the Diversity Council here in Rochester join them for a session in one of our trying to outline and build what it means to be equitable and what kind of components we want to include when building these strategies. And they provided a really great history on the racial redlining in Rochester that helped inform some of the plan and strategy here. The other tactic is to evaluate availability and accessibility of housing services that serve specific needs, specifically LGBTQ plus safe housing, universally designed housing, the same way we think of sidewalks and the slits that we have in sidewalks for those with mobility needs to use the sidewalks, we would think for houses as well and how they're designed. And then just supportive housing for persons with record, and continuing to just explore opportunities to enhance the availability that's out there. For resilient economy, there was several that focused on promoting small and local businesses, as well as the areas where these businesses thrive. So this particular strategy focuses on creating integrated downtown and area business centers, understanding that when we facilitate development that not only prioritizes living and shopping and entertainment, but working in food and centralized areas, that facilitates in itself naturally occurring affordable housing. So you can see the overlap in some of these strategies and tactics across the focus areas in our plan and how they build off of one another. An example here is that if we were to locate daycare centers close to business districts or transit hubs that we're developing, it makes it easier for folks to have more services in one area. Another tactic is to repurpose underused or vacant real estate to create these complete walkable cities. So addressing areas of blight in our community can not only encourage investment, but help revitalize those neighborhoods, promote social interactions, and build community belongingness. Another key theme that we heard in most of our listening sessions with engagement in the community was just more opportunities to connect with one another, events, and just better communication across the board. Accessible transportation, a strategy here is to support and increase initiatives, policies, and programs that accelerate the transition to lower carbon transportation. The city is looking at an EV infrastructure plan that would outline goals and tactics in coordination with other public agencies and businesses to develop how EV infrastructure would be developed in our community and where it would be located, and what sort of incentives could be provided to kind of further the adoption of electric vehicles. Another tactic is to require EV charging stations in new developments, especially those with multifamily residential. The city itself is working on a goal to transition our own city fleet and a green fleet policy to go along with that. We've already started purchasing electric buses for our public transportation fleet and working with the schools to share resources and financing opportunities that would help transition the school's fleet to electric as well. Finally, I mentioned this, but creating incentives for electrical vehicle charging stations and the adoption of electric vehicles overall. So how do we continue to prioritize public-facing interventions, especially in low-income neighborhoods, to increase the option of micromobility and other transit modes of transportation that are available to our community members? The last focus area in the plan is environmental health. And the strategy I pulled out here is improving land and soil health. One of the tactics here is to promote outreach and education programs that focus on sustainable agriculture and the benefits of local food systems through community workshops, gardens, farms, and tours. Again, there are many community organizations working on this already, so this is something the city can continue to support. Another one is to develop options, again, for use of vacant public space, to develop community gardens and education to go along with that. Providing equal access and investment in parks and open space. I mentioned this in the beginning when we talked about community needs that were identified, and green space being one of those, particularly how we're investing in our local parks in the community and making sure that that's equitable investment across all parks. And then ensuring that the community needs are met through those planning activities. So engaging the residents themselves who live and access the parks. Finally, increasing and encouraging the transition to native lawns for Rochester residents throughout the community. Again, there are some programs in place that already do this, and the city does provide grant funding to homeowners who are interested in installing a pollinator habitat or a rain garden on their property. But this is something we can continue to support our city teammates and other organizations working to do. So finally, we're at the point now where we wrapped up the plan in fall of 2021 and are here working on its implementation. And that really starts with just getting the plan out there in front of the community and continually ongoing communication with community members and internally with city departments. So part of the engagement process in developing this plan was meeting with city departments where there was a natural alignment to the work that they do and how they serve the community, so that they had the opportunity to provide input on the strategies that were being developed as they related to their own roles and positions and work plans. So with the finalized plan, there will be continued check-ins with city departments as we do our work plans each year to see how these strategies at each timeline point fit into those work plans, as well as just to provide updates in progress, but really to make sure that as a city across departments, we're looking at this as a team and not individually between our own departments of how we can build sustainability into our own operations, but the community as well and the projects that we're pursuing. We'll also be organizing biannual meetings with community partners. So several of our task force members not only represented community members, but the businesses and the organizations that they serve or work with. And so we want to continue to meet with those to share progress and showcase the work that they're all doing that helps support this plan, but also to broaden our impact. So that we as a city know of the opportunities available there to support or influence the work that our community partners are out there doing. And then, as I mentioned, ongoing community communication. So we're working on a website right now that will house the final plan. We have an existing website for the task force, but transitioning that now that the task force work is done and we have a final plan, to continue to share and highlight different strategies of the plan with the community, success stories from our local community partners, resources that are available, and just in general what we're up to in terms of working towards the plan's implementation. With that, I'll open it up for any questions, and thank you all for joining us tonight. You can also feel free to use the chat if you'd like to put your questions in the chat there instead. And I'm just going to go ahead and drop the link to our final plan here in the chat. If there aren't any questions, I'll just thank you all for joining us here tonight. For those of you who were able to tune in, and we hope to see you at some other events this month for EarthFest. On April 14th, we have our urban and agricultural water stewards presentation that provides an overview of the different types of conservation practices between agricultural and urban landscapes. And then on the 21st, we do have a presentation from Olmsted County on proper waste and recycling techniques. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.